The laughter echoed in the vaulted lecture hall, like a blade dragged against stone. Sharp, dismissive, cruel. Professor Harold Kensington, a man whose reputation was as polished as the silver buttons on his waistcoat, leaned back in his chair and let the sound roll. He had built his career on ridiculing what he called academic fairy tales, and nothing pleased him more than dismantling a hopeful idea in front of an audience. Today's target was a stone tablet, thick and weathered, sitting under the harsh white lights of the university's archaeology lab. Atlantis, Harold scoffed, the word dripping with disdain. The darling of conspiracy theorists, mystics, and dreamers. And now, apparently, my students. His gray eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to challenge him. No one did, except one. At the back of the hall, unnoticed by most, stood Daniel Shaw, a quiet research assistant with a habit of listening more than speaking. He had carried the tablet into the lab himself earlier that morning, carefully wrapped in cloth, like one carries something sacred. It wasn't just an artifact to him, it was a fragment of his own life. Daniel's grandfather, a fisherman from Crete, had whispered stories of a city swallowed by the sea of marble columns that glowed beneath the waves, of people who could harness the ocean's power. As a child, Daniel had thought them bedtime fables. As an adult, studying languages and fragments of ancient myths, he began to see patterns where others dismissed fantasy. And when a diver brought him the battered tablet from the depths off Santorini, something inside him stirred. Yet here he was, watching the professor mock it. Notice the crude etchings, Harold continued, tapping the surface with a pen as though striking an animal carcass. A blend of Greek and gibberish. The marks of a clever fraudster seeking coin from gullible collectors. Nothing more. But Daniel saw what Harold refused to. Beneath the scratches, beneath centuries of erosion, faint lines formed shapes that no casual forger would bother with. Curved waves, concentric circles, jagged arrows. They matched the motifs his grandfather once drew in the sand with a stick when retelling the legend. Daniel's heart beat faster. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice. Look well, boy. The sea remembers what men forget. Professor. Daniel's voice trembled but did not falter. With respect, I think you may be overlooking something. The hall grew still. Dozens of eyes turned toward the quiet assistant. Harold's lips curled into a thin smile. He lived for this, a lamb, wandering into the lion's den. Enlighten us, Mr. Shaw, Harold said, dripping sarcasm. Do tell me how this rock, he rapped the tablet again, is the key to a fairy tale island. Daniel stepped forward, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of conviction. These aren't random scratches, they're a system. Look closely under angled light here. He adjusted the lamp, and suddenly, what had looked like erosion became deliberate lines. Circles nested within circles, each etched with tiny marks. A map. Murmurs rippled through the students. Even Harold's smile flickered, though he quickly masked it with another scoff. Pareidolia, he declared. The human mind sees patterns where none exist, like faces in clouds. But Daniel felt something stir inside him, a certainty as strong as the tide. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe. This tablet carried the whispers of a truth buried for millennia. He met Harold's cold gaze and held it. Or maybe, Daniel said softly but firmly, it's not the mind playing tricks. Maybe it's the past speaking to us, and we're too arrogant to listen. The words hung in the air, heavier than any stone. For a moment, Harold said nothing. For a moment, his laughter was gone. And in that silence, the story of Atlantis began to rise not from myth, but from the stubborn heartbeat of a forgotten truth. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Professor Kensington's life. The tension thickened, the lines on the tablet glowing faintly under the light, promising revelations that no amount of arrogance could bury. The lab emptied slowly, After Harold Kensington's laughter-filled dismissal, but Daniel remained. He couldn't walk away, not with the tablet staring at him like a secret begging to be told. The heavy door of the lecture hall clicked shut, and silence returned, except for the faint hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. Daniel leaned over the stone, his shadow falling across its worn surface, and let his eyes trace the grooves. Most people saw erosion. He saw intention. He adjusted the lamp again, angling it so the light skimmed across the ridges instead of shining directly down. That was when he noticed them markings that weren't visible moments before. Tiny notches, hidden in the curves of the concentric circles. They gleamed under the slant of the light, like scars revealed under moonlight. His breath caught. "They're directional," he whispered. The realization sent a chill through him. These weren't decorative flourishes. They were indicators, almost like bearings on a compass. The circles weren't just circles, they were layered coastlines. Daniel grabbed his notebook and quickly sketched the patterns. His hand trembled, but his mind raced with precision. The symbols reminded him of archaic Cretan glyphs, but with subtle variations. It was as though an older language had been overlaid with one slightly newer, the way generations leave echoes in speech. He remembered how Harold mocked him in front of everyone, and bitterness surged. But beneath the sting of humiliation, another emotion stirred: determination. If the professor refused to see, Daniel would look deeper. As he leaned closer, a memory rose, unbidden. His grandfather's rough hands guiding his smaller ones as they drew shapes in wet sand. Circles, waves, and dots. The boy Daniel had thought it a game. The man Daniel now realized it was a lesson. "There's truth in old stories," his grandfather had whispered. "You only need the eyes to see it." A soft creak behind him made him start. He turned to see Harold re-entering, his expression unreadable. "Still here, Mr. Shaw?" The professor's tone carried that same knife-edge mockery, but there was something else too, a flicker of curiosity. Daniel swallowed. "Yes, sir. I think there's more here than you allowed for." Harold approached, his shoes clicking on the polished floor. He leaned over the tablet and squinted under the angled light, his lips pressed thin. For a fraction of a second, his mask slipped, and Daniel caught it, the brief widening of the eyes, the tiny intake of breath. Harold had seen the notches too, but then, as quickly as it came, it vanished. "Optical illusion," Harold muttered. "This stone has been weathered by centuries underwater. Tricks of light, nothing more." Daniel's frustration boiled. "You saw it," he said quietly. "Even if you won't admit it." The professor straightened, towering over him. "Careful, Shaw. Ambition ruins more young men than ignorance ever did." But Daniel held his ground. For the first time, he didn't shrink from Harold's authority, and arrogance blinds more old men than ignorance ever could. The words slipped out before he could stop them. The silence that followed was electric. Harold's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He turned sharply on his heel and walked away, the door slamming behind him. Daniel exhaled, his chest tight. He hadn't planned to defy Harold like that, but the words had come from a place deeper than fear. They came from the conviction that what lay on this tablet was real, and it could change everything. He turned back to the stone, and under the soft glow of the lamp, the hidden marking seemed to pulse, as if acknowledging his defiance. The tablet was no longer just an object. It was an invitation, and Daniel knew he was going to accept it, no matter the cost. Daniel sat alone in his cramped apartment that night. The notebook spread open on his desk. His sketches of the tablet covered the page, circles within circles, dotted lines, jagged arrows. The lamp at his desk buzzed faintly, but his mind roared with thoughts. He traced the lines again with his pencil, but what he saw now was not just geometry, it was memory. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and he was a boy again. Sitting on the rocky shore of Crete, his grandfather's weathered voice weaving legends into the salty air. The city was proud, the old man had whispered. Its towers pierced the sky, its walls gleamed like ivory, but pride sinks heavier than stone. The sea took it back. Young Daniel had laughed then, dismissing it as myth. Yet his grandfather never told stories idly. Behind the weathered face and calloused hands was a man who had once been more than a fisherman. Few knew it, but Daniel did. His grandfather had once been a linguist during the war, decoding enemy transmissions, breaking patterns others thought impossible. After the war, he returned to the sea, silent about his past. Only in fragments did Daniel glimpse it, in his grandfather's fascination with strange symbols, his muttered notes about forgotten tongues. Now, staring at the sketches, Daniel realized the connection. The old man hadn't just entertained a child. He had been passing down fragments of something he believed, perhaps even something he had seen himself. A voice inside Daniel whispered, "This is your inheritance." The thought filled him with both warmth and dread. Warmth, because it meant his grandfather's words lived on through him. Dread, because it meant Harold Kensington's cruel laughter wasn't just academic arrogance, it was a threat to burying truth itself. Daniel pressed his pencil harder, circling one cluster of symbols. He recognized the resemblance to Linear A, the undeciphered script of the Minoans, which had baffled scholars for centuries. But these marks weren't random. They aligned with patterns his grandfather had once sketched in the sand, 3 concentric rings, broken by a single path leading outward. His breath quickened. That path wasn't just a mark, it was direction. A way out, or a way in? The sudden buzz of his phone startled him. A message from Clara. Clara Morales, a fellow researcher in the linguistics department, had often shared late-night coffee runs with Daniel. Unlike Harold, she treated his curiosity with respect. "Didn't leave campus yet?" The text read, "I saw Kensington storm out like someone stole his crown." Daniel hesitated, then snapped a photo of his sketches and sent it. "Look at this. It's not erosion, it's code." The reply came quickly. "Where did you get this?" "Santorini dive. Passed down to me. Don't tell anyone else yet." There was a pause. Then, "Daniel, if this is real, it changes everything." He stared at the screen, the weight of her words sinking into him. "If this is real," the phrase echoed in his head. He wanted to believe it was real, but belief alone wasn't enough. Proof was required. Proof that would silence Harold's laughter and make the world listen. As the night deepened, Daniel imagined what such proof would mean. Atlantis, a city spoken of by Plato, dismissed as allegory. What if it had truly existed? What if its ruins still lay hidden, waiting for eyes bold enough to see? His pulse quickened. He flipped the notebook closed, shoved it into his bag, and stood. He would return to the lab tomorrow. He would study the tablet under every spectrum of light the university could offer. He would not stop until he unlocked its voice. Yet beneath his determination, a quiet thought whispered in the dark. What if Harold is right? What if this is all illusion and I'm chasing ghosts? Daniel clenched his fists. Number. He would not allow doubt to consume him. He owed his grandfather more than that. He owed himself more than that. "The sea remembers," he murmured into the silence, "and so will I." The following night, the archaeology lab was cloaked in darkness, save for the steady glow of a single desk lamp. Daniel had slipped in after hours, heart pounding at the thought of getting caught. But the urgency in his chest drowned out any hesitation. The stone tablet waited on the workbench, inert to the world, yet alive in his mind. He felt it humming, whispering, daring him to see what Harold Kensington had refused to acknowledge. He donned a pair of gloves, not out of protocol but reverence, and gently tilted the tablet toward the light. His notebook lay open beside him, filled with half-finished sketches and scribbled theories. Tonight would be different. Tonight he would not just look, he would decipher. From his bag, he pulled a small, ultraviolet lamp borrowed from Clara, who had raised her eyebrows when he asked but said nothing. When the purple glow spilled over the stone, Daniel gasped. Lines invisible under normal light burst forth, delicate grooves that formed sequences, like sentences etched into time. They shimmered faintly, as though the stone itself carried memory of the sun. He leaned closer, tracing the patterns with his gloved finger. They were not Greek, not Phoenician, not any known script, but their rhythm struck him like an echo from his grandfather's lessons. His mind conjured the old man's voice. Look not at letters, boy, but at their dance. Language lives in movement, not shapes. Daniel scribbled furiously, recording every line. Soon, he noticed repetition, 3 recurring clusters of symbols, each one aligned with a point on the concentric circles. Repetition meant meaning. The more he copied, the more the symbols revealed themselves to him, shifting from abstract scratches into something alive. Clara's words from the night before replayed in his head. If this is real, it changes everything. It was real. He could feel it in his bones. Hours passed, though Daniel barely noticed. His eyes ached, his hand cramped, but exhilaration pushed him on. Then, somewhere around dawn, as light bled faintly through the high windows, he saw it. A pattern clicked. The central symbol, the one carved at the heart of the circles, wasn't just a decorative emblem. It was a sunburst. From it radiated 3 lines, each pointing toward clusters of smaller symbols. He arranged them in his notes, aligning the tablet's circles with old Mediterranean maps. And then, it struck him like a blow. The symbols weren't random. They were coordinates, not modern latitude and longitude, but navigational markers, ancient bearings, mapped against stars and coastlines. Daniel's eyes widened as he sketched the lines over a faded chart of the Aegean. 2 of the bearings matched known islands. The third pointed farther out, into the open sea, into a stretch of water that Plato had once described vaguely in his dialogues. Daniel's chest tightened. The implication was staggering. This wasn't allegory. It was instruction. A path. He sat back, staring at the notebook. His pulse thundered in his ears. For years, Atlantis had been treated as myth, a story to caution against hubris. But here, on this battered stone, was a map that suggested it had once been real, its ruins hidden in the ocean's shadow. A tremor of doubt flickered. Could he be wrong? Was he projecting meaning onto marks that had none? Harold's sneering voice taunted him in his mind. Pareidolia. Shaw. Faces in clouds. But then he remembered the look in Harold's eyes, the day before the flicker of recognition he had tried to bury. Even Harold had seen something. Daniel whispered into the silence. This isn't clouds. This is truth. As he closed his notebook, exhaustion finally catching him, a strange calm settled over him. He knew what he had to do next. The coordinates had to be tested. The sea itself would decide whether the tablet was fantasy or revelation. The journey had not yet begun, but the path was clear. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to think the forbidden word without fear, only awe. Atlantis. Morning sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the university library, dust motes drifting lazily in the beams. Students shuffled between shelves, oblivious to the storm brewing in a quiet corner of the archaeology department. Daniel sat at a long oak table, his notebook spread open before him, the tablet sketches glaring back like dangerous secrets. Clara sat across from him, her brow furrowed, her dark hair falling into her face as she traced the lines he had drawn. "This can't be ignored," she whispered. Her voice was urgent, almost reverent. "If these coordinates are what you think they are, then this tablet, it's priceless." Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice. "Harold will bury it. He'll mock it, until no one dares to look twice." As if summoned by the very words, the air shifted. A shadow fell across the table. Daniel froze before lifting his gaze. There stood Professor Kensington, arms folded, his mouth curled into the faintest sneer. "Ah," Harold said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough for nearby students to hear. "Mr. Shaw and Miss Morales. Plotting to turn fairy tales into tenure, I see." Clara straightened in her seat. "We're analyzing data, Professor. You might call it research." Harold's eyes flicked to the notebook, narrowing at the sketches. His hand shot out faster than Daniel expected, snatching the open pages. He studied them briefly, his expression tightening before melting into practiced disdain. Coordinates. Circles. You've truly outdone yourself this time, Shaw. Perhaps you should try your luck writing fiction. A ripple of chuckles spread among a few students nearby. Daniel's cheeks burned, but he clenched his fists under the table. You saw the notches, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the heat in his chest. You know there's more here than you're admitting. Harold's smile sharpened. What I know, he said loudly enough to draw more attention, is that Atlantis is a myth. Plato invented it to teach a moral lesson, not to gift future romantics with treasure hunts. And I will not have my department turned into a circus by a starry-eyed assistant and his accomplice. Clara's eyes flashed. And what if you're wrong? She asked, her voice ringing clear. For a moment, the mask slipped. A flicker of doubt darted across Harold's face. But then he laughed a sharp, hollow sound and tossed the notebook back onto the table. If you want to waste your time chasing phantoms, so be it. Just don't drag my name down with yours. He turned on his heel and strode away, leaving behind the sting of humiliation. The library buzzed with whispers, students craning to glimpse the drama. Daniel felt the weight of every eye, the heat of every mocking grin. But beneath the humiliation, a new resolve hardened inside him. Let him laugh, Daniel muttered, gathering his notebook. His voice shook, but not with fear, with conviction. The tablet doesn't care who believes. The truth is still the truth. Clara placed her hand gently on his arm. Then we follow it. Together. For a moment, Daniel met her gaze. There was no ridicule there. No condescension, only belief. It was enough to drown out the echoes of Harold's laughter. Still, as he packed his bag and prepared to leave, a thought gnawed at him. Harold had seen the coordinates. He had recognized them. If only for a split second. His arrogance was not born solely of disbelief. It was born of fear. And that fear meant something. The battle was no longer between Daniel and an ancient tablet. It was between Daniel and Harold Kensington himself. One sought truth, the other sought control. And sooner or later, the two would collide. The sea was restless that morning, its surface glittering under a pale dawn. Waves slapped against the rust-streaked hull of the small research vessel as it bobbed on the Aegean waters. Daniel gripped the railing, the salt spray cold against his face, and stared out at the endless expanse. Somewhere beneath that rolling skin of water lay answers that had haunted him since the night he deciphered the tablet's markings. Clara joined him at the rail, her hair tied back against the wind. She followed his gaze toward the horizon. Are you certain this is the spot? Daniel opened his notebook, carefully shielded from the spray. The concentric circles he had copied from the tablet aligned perfectly with the bearings he had cross-referenced. He tapped a point just west of Santorini. Here. If the tablet was accurate, this is where the city should have been swallowed. Clara nodded, though her brow furrowed. It's a trench, nearly 3,000 meters deep. We won't find marble columns gleaming under shallow water. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe not. But ruins don't need to gleam to tell their story. A shout broke the moment. From the cabin, the boat's captain, a leathery man with years of salt crusted into his skin, waved a hand. Currents are strong here. We don't linger long. Daniel and Clara moved quickly to prepare the equipment. A submersible camera rig, borrowed from the university under vague pretenses of marine study, lay coiled with cables and sensors. Daniel's hands trembled as he fed the line, adjusting the lens, feeling both thrill and dread. As the rig descended into the dark, the monitor flickered with murky images. First, fish and drifting silt. Then, only blackness. Daniel's chest tightened. Had he miscalculated? Was Harold right after all? Then, slowly, shapes emerged. Not natural rock, but angular forms. Stone blocks fitted together with precision, edges worn by centuries yet still distinct. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God! The camera panned across a massive structure, half buried in sediment. Columns lay broken like ribs across the ocean floor. Arches, toppled and twisted, hinted at streets once walked by human feet. And there, faint but unmistakable, was the pattern Daniel knew by heart. Concentric rings carved into stone, mirroring the tablet. His heart thundered. "It's real," he whispered, almost in disbelief. "It's real." The captain muttered a prayer under his breath, crossing himself. "Things down there should stay down there," he warned, voice low. "The sea doesn't give up her dead easily." But Daniel couldn't look away. Every frame of the monitor pulled him deeper into awe. His grandfather's voice filled his memory. "The sea remembers what men forget." The sea had remembered. And now, it was speaking. Clara touched his shoulder, her eyes wide with both terror and wonder. "Do you realize what this means? We've found it. We've actually found Atlantis." Yet even in triumph, Daniel felt a shadow creep in. Harold Kensington. He had dismissed, mocked, and humiliated. But he had also seen the truth, hidden in the tablet. If Harold learned what they had uncovered, he would stop at nothing to seize control of it, to bury Daniel's name under ridicule, while claiming the glory for himself. Daniel's jaw set. "Then we document everything. Every frame, every reading. Evidence so strong it can't be laughed away." But as the submersible descended deeper, the feed suddenly flickered. Static crackled across the monitor. A sharp jolt shook the vessel. Clara gripped the edge of the console. "What was that?" The captain cursed. "Current's turning. We need to pull her up." "No," Daniel snapped, his voice harsher than he intended. "Not yet. We're close." The monitor steadied for a heartbeat just long enough to reveal something vast looming out of the trench. A wall, carved with symbols eerily similar to those on the tablet, stretching farther than the camera's lens could capture. Daniel's breath caught. The proof was undeniable now. Atlantis was no myth. It was history, submerged and waiting. And above, on the rocking vessel, Daniel knew their discovery was about to ignite a war not just with the sea, but with Harold Kensington himself. The laboratory auditorium was packed to the brim. Reporters, scholars, and students crowded every seat, their faces buzzing with anticipation. Word had spread like wildfire. Daniel Shaw and Clara Morales had returned from the Aegean with footage that defied centuries of skepticism. The university had insisted the findings be presented publicly. Yet Daniel knew this was no celebration. This was a battlefield. At the front stood Professor Harold Kensington, adjusting his tie with slow, deliberate motions. His jaw was set, his polished shoes gleaming under the stage lights. He had demanded to preside over the presentation, claiming authority over academic standards. To Daniel, it was clear. Harold intended to discredit them before the evidence could take root. Daniel's hands trembled as he checked the projector. Clara placed her hand over his, steadying it. "Truth is on our side," she whispered. Her eyes were fierce, her voice unwavering. The crowd hushed as Harold stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone dripping with the practiced superiority that had cowed generations of students, "we gather today to evaluate the claims of a spirited research assistant and his colleague, claims which, I assure you, belong more to the realm of fantasy than scholarship." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Harold gestured toward Daniel with a theatrical flourish. "Mr. Shaw, if you would indulge us with your fairy tale." Heat flushed Daniel's cheeks, but he walked to the podium, notebook in hand. He glanced once at Clara, her small nod gave him courage. Then he clicked the projector. The screen lit up with grainy footage from the submersible. At first, only darkness and drifting silt filled the image. A few scoffs echoed from the audience. But then stone. Angular. Deliberate. Undeniable. Gasps erupted as the camera panned across broken columns. Streets carved in concentric rings. Walls etched with symbols identical to those on the tablet. Whispers swelled into astonished cries. Daniel's voice cut through them, steady now. These structures were found at a depth of nearly 3,000 meters, west of Santorini. They match Plato's description of a city swallowed by the sea down to the concentric design. This is not myth. This is evidence. Harold's face hardened. He strode to the screen, pointing with his pen. Illusions. Rock formations shaped by volcanic activity. Mere coincidence. But Clara stepped forward, her voice sharp. Coincidence doesn't carve glyphs into stone walls. Coincidence doesn't arrange ruins in perfect rings. She clicked to the next slide, an image of the tablet, overlaid with the footage. The patterns aligned flawlessly. The audience gasped louder. Harold's composure faltered. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. He barked, "You manipulated this!" Daniel's voice rang with sudden steel. "You saw the notches, Professor. You knew the tablet wasn't a forgery. You dismissed it because you were afraid. Afraid it would expose that you've spent your career laughing at truths you refused to see." The room fell silent. Harold's mouth opened, then closed. His polished mask cracked, and for the first time, the audience saw not a towering authority, but a man trembling under the weight of truth. A reporter stood abruptly. "Mr. Shaw, are you saying you've discovered Atlantis?" Daniel's chest rose and fell. He met the eyes of the crowd, of Harold, of Clara, and with a steady voice he said, "We haven't just discovered Atlantis. We've proven that arrogance can bury truth, but it can never kill it." The auditorium erupted. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashed, students cheered. Clara gripped Daniel's hand, her smile fierce with vindication. And Harold Kensington, once untouchable, once feared, stood frozen at the podium. The echo of his mocking laughter, now a memory drowned by the roar of revelation. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered. Weeks later, the world still trembled from the revelation that Atlantis was no longer myth but history. Newspapers screamed headlines, documentaries scrambled for airtime, and scholars debated in every corner of academia. And at the heart of it all stood Daniel Shaw, the once quiet assistant whose name now carried the weight of discovery. He found himself back on the rocky shores of Crete, the salt air thick with memory. The sea stretched before him, calm and endless, as if guarding its secrets with a gentler hand now that one had been shared. Daniel knelt at the edge of the surf, letting the waves lap over his fingers, and whispered to the memory of his grandfather, "You were right. The sea remembers." Behind him, Clara approached with a folded newspaper under her arm. She sat beside him, handing it over with a smile. The front page bore their photograph, two young researchers standing against the backdrop of the Aegean, their faces lit by the glow of discovery. Atlantis found. The truth beneath the waves. "You realize," Clara said softly, "we'll spend the rest of our lives answering questions about this." Daniel chuckled, though the sound was weary. Better questions than laughter. He glanced at her, his expression turning thoughtful. "I keep thinking about Harold." Clara's smile faded. "He hasn't spoken publicly since the presentation." Indeed, Harold Kensington had retreated into silence. His name, once synonymous with authority, now lingered in footnotes as the man who mocked what he could not see. Some pitied him, others scorned him, but none listened to him anymore. Daniel sighed. "I don't hate him. Not really. I pity him. To stand at the edge of truth and laugh instead of listen, that's a prison of its own." Clara rested a hand on his shoulder. "You broke free of it. That's what matters." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. Daniel rose to his feet, gazing out at the horizon, where the waters concealed a lost world. He imagined the streets of Atlantis, the voices that once echoed through its halls, the pride that had led to its fall. And he knew the lesson wasn't about ruins or riches, it was about humility. Atlantis was destroyed by arrogance, Daniel said quietly, more to himself than to Clara. Maybe it waited until someone humble enough to listen came along. Someone willing to believe. Clara nodded, her eyes shining. "And you did." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the waves breaking gently at their feet. The discovery had changed the world, but it had also changed Daniel. He was no longer the quiet assistant afraid of laughter. He was the man who had faced ridicule, trusted his inheritance, and let truth guide him into the deep. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the sea in molten gold, Daniel felt a peace he had never known. His grandfather's voice seemed to rise from the tide. The sea remembers what men forget. He turned to Clara, his voice steady, carrying the weight of all he had learned. If this story teaches anything, it's that arrogance blinds, but humility reveals. The truth doesn't belong to those who laugh at it. It belongs to those who listen. Clara smiled, the wind tugging at her hair. And you listened. Together they watched the horizon, where the sea kept its secrets and revealed them only to those who sought with open hearts. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph. The waves rolled on, eternal and unbroken, as if echoing the lesson Atlantis had left behind.